Fort Siloso was well barricaded and protected, but in the end, the Japanese did not come from the sea and literally bite in from Malaya in the north.
This is where they had their first kiss.
I know. Here at the Fort Factory, the British surrendered formally to the Japanese in 1942. We are now retracing the path of the surrender party. And that is exactly the view of Fort Factory they saw.
Memories at Old Fort Factory were only reopened to the public in early 2006. So why would my father take my mum to a dreary abandoned building back in the 70s when they were dating?
What's wrong with this place? It is full of history and meaningful stories.
Well, I guess you curators, I mean ex-curators and World War II history writers share something in common.
You of no culture.
He fell in love here, and with that first kiss, he writes of how the British surrendered to the Japanese unconditionally here at Fort Factory.
The Japanese had come down Malaya very quickly, but they were outnumbered 3-1 in Singapore. Still, against the odds, they managed to pressure the British to surrender in the best interest of everyone.
And here, where the British surrendered to the Japanese, my father also surrendered his heart to my mum. My grandfather died during the Japanese occupation. All Dad could talk about was how grandfather lived and died during those dreadful days.
Take a look here. In the days of the Japanese occupation, lots of freedoms were taken away.
Freedoms we take for granted today, like free and easy travel. The Japanese set up many checkpoints along the road, and at each checkpoint, travelers were required to show a chop to be granted passage. The chop cleared a traveler so he did not have to be delayed for questioning. If you were lucky, you might get a chop on your shirt. You would not wash the shirt, for if the chop seemed questionable, there might have been negative consequences.
And if you were not lucky,
You may get another chop. In those days, many people were dying from disease and there was little medical supply. Not for local populations. People have to be creative in solving problems.
and who was he?
Dr. Montero. When people were getting diphtheria and dying because there were insufficient medical supplies, he managed to cultivate a serum using 6 goats.
That would have saved lots of lives.
It did. This bust of Dr. Montero was commissioned by his wife for the gallery. Speaking of supplies, even food was hard to come by. Sweet potato and yam were grown extensively during the occupation years.
Only 2 kinds?
No, there were more. Look at that lalang grass. Some people then believed that grinding them to powder and drinking its mixture would give enough nutrition and vitamins to survive.
So how does it taste?
Extremely bitter. Come. I'll show you more stuff inside. You can see and read about a lot of Japanese atrocities at the memory of Old Fort Factory, but they were not all bad. Like this gentleman here, Mamoru Shinozaki. He freely gave out life-saving security passes to whoever asked for it. Some of these precious exhibits were donated by Japanese from that time. And shortly after the opening of this gallery,
A Japanese national, Mr. Taka Sakurai, personally visited to dun and share some valuable artifacts. Mr. Sakurai was a soldier based in Shonanto with the propaganda department, and he donated 5 rare original postcards of which he was involved in printing.
It's so uplifting to see items donated by both sides that fought the war. By the way, did the Japanese surrender here as well eventually?
no, they surrendered at the City Hall, but that's not the next stop. Here in Changi Museum, one of their major displays is this pair of samurai swords that was handed over by a Japanese general to a British mayor as a symbol of surrender. After the war, the British mayor's family who came to possess the swords wanted to return this very valuable family heirloom to the family in Japan, but they declined because the sword brought with it the shame of surrender.
My grandfather died here as a prisoner of war, and my father came back to Singapore to find out more about him. He mentioned once he only wanted to stay here for a few months, but I guess he found something to keep him here.
Or someone. Japanese occupation lasted 3年08个月, 3 years and 8 months. Changi Museum chronicles those dark days.
What a lovely quilt! Where does it come from?
This is similar to the one made during the war. At the time, the male prisoners were isolated from the women and the children. Any form of contact was forbidden. With permission from the Japanese head warden, the women sewed little patches of cloth and put their names on it. Together, these patches of cloth formed a quilt that was then given to the male prisoners. In this way, the men could see if their wives and children were still alive by looking at the names on the quilt. It gave them tremendous emotional support and boosted their will to live. See, Sarah, these women never gave up fighting until they saw their loved ones.
I think I can understand a bit of why father wanted to learn more about grandfather's life and death.
Those were dark days.
Mr. Heng, my father and mother, the one I grew up with, had a very stable relationship. They respected each other. He cared very much for her and she for him.
I know.
Yes, you read the letters.
Well, I also have very good memory too.
Then you should know that when my mother found...
Your English mother.
Yes, English mother found out about me, she made my father choose a good life for him and me, and his real love.
Your mother, I mean your real mother, chose a good life for you.
You think so? Would you leave someone you love if you thought it was for their good?
Let us find her and answer that question. Hey, look at that cross.
That one?
Yes, a British artilleryman, Harold Stockton, made this entirely from artillery shells when he was a POW.
Ah, that's brilliant.
So, from artillery shell to a cross, from disorder can come peace.